Iran's president says that he recently met with the country's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, for the first time since the Ayatollah's appointment back in March. Mojtaba Khamenei's father and the former supreme leader was killed at the start of the war in a U.S.-Israeli attack. Now, his son, the current supreme leader, has not been seen in public since then and was reportedly wounded in the same airstrike. Now, this comes as U.S. President Donald Trump says talks between the U.S. and Iran could very soon lead to a breakthrough after a brief U.S. military operation in the Strait of Hormuz. Here's more.
The United States' mission to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz stopped about as quickly as it began. President Trump paused it because he says talks with Iran are going well.
They want to make a deal. We've had very good talks over the last 24 hours, and it's very possible that we'll make a deal.
Trump posted on social media that Iran could soon open the Strait of Hormuz, threatening if they don't agree, the bombing starts. He also said in an interview the war will be over quickly. That stoked investor optimism, driving oil prices down and markets up. Right now, Iran says it's reviewing Washington's latest proposal to end the war, which appears to be less ambitious than previous versions. The idea would be to agree to disagree on key sticking points to achieve a formal end to the war first, before restarting tough negotiations later on. Noticeably absent from the proposal are demands that Iran immediately stop its nuclear program, although President Trump has continued to say the U.S. cannot allow Iran to have nuclear weapons. Whatever happens next between the U.S. and Iran, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel is coordinating with the U.S. and is prepared for all scenarios. That's as Israel resumed bombing in southern Lebanon, a day after Israeli strikes on Beirut's suburbs that it says killed a top Hezbollah commander. Further tests of a truce that came into force almost 3 weeks ago. An end to Israel's attacks on Lebanon is one of Iran's demands to stop the wider war.
Well, I asked Middle East analyst Daniel Gerlach about the significance of reports that the Iranian president has spoken with the supreme leader.
Well, it's very important to reassure the followers of the regime, their own constituency, because over the last couple of weeks, you had statements on X and blessings and threats issued by the new supreme leader, but he hasn't appeared in public. And there have been detailed reports, speculations, but also credible reports that he's badly injured and not able to speak in public. So at one point, the regime's own constituents need to get some reassurance that there's no theater being played and that the supreme leader is alive, though he's probably not the one who really takes the decisions. On the other hand, towards the West, towards the United States, it is important also for President Pezeshkian to mention this, because there's always a discussion, if we strike a deal with the Iranians, who is actually going to be the one who decides on it, and who will be in, and will the deal be void if the structure of the regime changes again and if the supreme leader reemerges?
Yeah, speaking of a deal, Iran is reportedly considering a one-page peace proposal from the Trump administration. President Trump says that this is not even a war anymore. He's using the word skirmish. Are we looking at the beginning of the end of this conflict?
No, I don't think it's going to be the end of the conflict. The conflict will be protracted. We are probably seeing the Americans trying to end the hot phase of the war. And you saw what also War Minister Pete Hegseth told Congress. He said that this is no longer a war, so we're not accountable. We do not depend on Congress's decision to continue this war, because there was a very critical 60 days phase within which the president could act without the approval of Congress, and now the president has to justify to Congress that this is no longer a war. Hence, he will be able to act alone. Now, this is a very awkward situation that we see, Brett. It's like one page, a memorandum of understanding, as opposed to a long and sophisticated, detailed and painstakingly detailed deal that the Americans and the E3 and other international powers, the United Nations, had struck with Iran in 2015 on the nuclear issue. But this is the style of the Trump administration. You hand out a memorandum of understanding, and maybe it's going to be easier for the Iranian side to sign it. On the other hand, we see that the Iranians really play triumphant. They want to show the world and themselves and their own constituency that they have defeated the Americans, that they have sustained all these attacks and are still there and still in control. And I'm not so optimistic that the Iranians are going to just like sign off on that memorandum of understanding, but negotiations are going on. That's positive.
Daniel, the U.S. president, he says that a deal is very possible, but he's also threatening a new wave of bombing if the Iranians do not say yes. I mean, we've heard this before, and it really didn't move the needle towards peace. I mean, is this a broken record?
It is a broken record, of course. On the other hand, the Trump administration desperately needs an exit to this. The Iranians are not telling the world that they also need an exit to this, because Iran's propaganda is like, okay, we can do this, we can endure as long as you want, but in fact, the Iranian economy and also the strategic situation of the Iranian regime is confronted with an existential threat. And it's not only theater that's being played there. Bear in mind that Iran was the country that was attacked, and Iran lost dozens of its political and military leaders. So the fact that the Iranian regime in particular, doesn't want to believe the good news and says maybe the Americans are going to strike again out of ongoing negotiations, as we have seen it in the past, needs to also be taken into account.
That was Daniel Gerlach there speaking with me earlier.
Well, let's pick through this with Simon Mabon. He's Professor of International Politics at Lancaster University School of Global Affairs in the UK. He specialises in the study of the Middle East and international relations. Welcome back to DW, Simon. Let's start with this 14.1-page plan. No one's saying officially what's in it, but if, as we heard in the report, there is no mention of Iran's nuclear development, that would be quite significant, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would, and I think this all captures quite neatly the ambiguity of this whole conflict and the US's approach to Iran. Its competing goals within the administration, the shift from a declared intent for regime change, moving towards stopping Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, to opening the Strait of Hormuz, and now we're seeing these talks. We're seeing rumors coming out about what could be in this so-called plan. And I think that the confusion and the backtracking, I think, highlights just how much of a strategic set of mistakes this has been from the Trump administration.
But even if this 14-point plan is something, this would not be the end of the war, would it? This sounds like the start of years-long negotiations.
Yeah, it sounds like it, and it's a really strange way of doing things, because normally you'd have the dialogue, the diplomacy first, and then an agreement to end the war once the issues have been addressed. But I think that given the past decade or so, since the first Trump administration withdrew from the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, we've seen diplomacy trying to capture some type of deal, a deal that was already there. Let's not forget, the deal was in place, it was agreed by all parties. But in the decade that's followed, we've seen efforts to renegotiate that deal, to get over the line with a diplomatic agreement about Iran's nuclear program that has failed. And now what we're led to believe is that there is going to be a memorandum of understanding that ends the war, but ushers in a 30-day period to get a nuclear deal and a deal over these really intractable issues, something that has not happened in the past 10 years. And the first nuclear deal took the best part of a decade as well. So it's a very, very strange way of doing things. But I think what it does is it highlights how intractable this conflict has become.
The Iranian and Chinese foreign ministers met in China yesterday, a week before Donald Trump makes his own trip to Beijing. What will Iran have been hoping for from yesterday's meeting?
So I assume it's about making sure that Beijing is firmly on Tehran's side, that it continues to cultivate this positive relationship with the Chinese state. It's had this long relationship with China, and China's played an important role in mediating with other regional rivals or erstwhile rivals, now rivals again, perhaps in Saudi Arabia, for example. And so I think Iran needs to make sure that China is firmly on side, particularly with regards to its future plans over exporting oil if and when this agreement is reached and indeed implemented. So I think it's about cultivating these positive relations and trying to make sure that Beijing remains on side with its plans.
OK, so here's when it gets really interesting, because after that meeting, China called for the restoration of normal and safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Today, the shipping data firm Lloyd's List Intelligence, they're reporting Iran has established a new government agency to approve transit through the strait and to collect tolls from shipping, which might be safe, but is certainly not normal. So how should we read this, both in relation to China's call and in relation to negotiations with the US?
Well, I think a lot of this hangs on what normal means and what it means to the various parties involved in the conflict. If normal is literally a ship is able to pass through the Strait of Hormuz from A to B, as it was able to do back in the start of February prior to the conflict, then there's an argument to say that this is maybe normal service resumed in that ships can transit through the Gulf, through the Strait of Hormuz. But if it's normal as in going back to a position where ships can transit through without having to pay a fee and without having to secure prior approval, then I think it's a very, very different scenario. And I think that what that does, what the establishment of this body does, is it tells us that Iran is going to continue to position the Strait of Hormuz and control over the strait centrally within its strategic planning. It's seen that it's able to exert a huge amount of pressure on the United States and indeed others through the strait. And it's realized that it's not Hezbollah, Hamas, the Hashd al-Shaabi in Iraq or the Houthis that are its biggest asset, but rather its geography, its control of the Strait of Hormuz. And in that respect, there isn't going to be a period whereby the traffic will return to how it was, toll-free and tariff-free, at least in the Islamic Republic's eyes. Right. It wants to exert control and continue that control.
Thanks for talking us through that, Simon. Professor Simon Mabon from Lancaster University.